Hey y'all, welcome back to Friendly Fire. Blessed are the curious. If you're new here, stick around because we don't do easy answers. I want to start today with something I said out loud this week that I probably shouldn't even admit to. I said we should be revolting. Now I want to be clear, I'm not calling for anything. I'm just talking. The way you talk when you're frustrated and you've hit a wall and you don't even know what else to do with what you're feeling. Because I was reading about some of the largest corporations in the world, billion-dollar companies, household names. They pay effectively nothing in federal taxes. Zero. While everybody else, regular people, covers the bill. Do you know that? And I felt something. I think most people feel something when they hear that. And an ache. It's a frustration. Maybe even rage. And here's what I've been trained to do with that feeling as a Christian. I've been trained to just manage it, to pray about it, to give it to God. Don't let bitterness take root. And look, there's something in all that. There's something real to that. I'm not throwing that away. But I've been sitting with the Sermon on the Mount for a while now. And I keep coming back to this one verse in Matthew 5 that I think completely reframes what we're supposed to do with that ache. So, what we're doing here today, we're going to Matthew 5:6. We're going to talk about justice, about mammon, about what Jesus actually meant when he said what he said. And we're going to talk about why your anger, my anger, the real stuff, the deep stuff, might not be a spiritual problem to fix. It might just be the most Jesus-shaped thing about you. Let's go. All right, guys, here we go. Matthew 5:6. If you grew up in church, you've heard this 1,000 times. It's one of the Beatitudes. It's that opening section of the Sermon on the Mount where Jesus is basically laying out his upside-down manifesto for how the kingdom of God actually works. He says, "Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be satisfied." Now, here's how most of us heard that growing up. Blessed are the people who really want to be good Christians, who hunger after holiness, who want more of God in their life. And that reading, it's not totally wrong, but it's about half the picture. And the half that's missing, that half actually has teeth. The key word is the Greek word dikaiosine, translated here as righteousness. Now, I'm going to keep the Greek super, super light because I'm not a Greek student. I'm not a seminary student. We're not in seminary to have a lecture here. So let's just keep it light. But this one word is worth pausing on because it changes everything, y'all. Dikaiosine in the world of a first century Jewish teacher does not primarily mean personal holiness. It means right order, right relationships, justice. The world functioning the way it's supposed to function. It's a legal word, a courtroom word, a systematic word. When the Hebrew prophets talked about what God wanted for the world, when Isaiah talked about justice rolling down like water, they were using that same concept. Not just clean hearts, a world set straight. So when Jesus says, "Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for dikaiosine," he's not just talking about people who want to be better Christians. He's talking about people who look at a broken world and they can't stomach it. People who see the gap between how things are and how they're supposed to be, and they feel it like a personal, physical ache. People who are hungry, not metaphorically, hungry. The kind of hunger that just won't let you go to sleep. And Jesus looks at those people and he says, blessed. That's the starting point. That's what we're building on. All right, so we need to think about the word blessed for just a second, because we've watered that one down as well. Greek word, here you go, warning, I won't say it right, makarios. The word behind makarios, blessed. It doesn't mean God is pleased with you and he will reward you eventually if you hang in there. It means you are in the right position now, like right now. For what's coming, it's less like a gold star, and it's more like you are standing exactly where you need to be standing when the tide turns. And then the whole Sermon on the Mount is built on this idea that the tide is turning, that the kingdom of God, it's breaking in, and that the whole order of things, it's being inverted. Blessed are the poor, because the kingdom of God, it belongs to them. Blessed are the meek, because they will inherit the earth. Blessed are the merciful, because mercy, it comes back around. This isn't pie in the sky stuff, y'all. This is Jesus announcing that the world is being reconstructed from the bottom up. And the people who are already living in alignment with that restructured world, the humble, the mourning, the hungry for justice, they're not behind. They're ahead of the ball. So when Jesus says, blessed are those who hunger for justice, he's not saying your pain is okay and God will make it better someday. He's saying the people who can't look at injustice and shrug, they're already living in sync with the kingdom. You're not spiritually immature for being angry about a rigged system. You might actually be more spiritually mature than the people that's made peace with it. That's a provocative statement, and I know it. I want to just sit with that for just a second. Because a lot of us, especially those of us who have grown up in church, been in church a long time, we've been shaped to read spiritual maturity as calm, steady, unshakable. And again, there probably is something to that. Spiritual maturity does produce a kind of groundness, a soberness, but there's a version of that calm, steady, unshakenness that just creates numbness. And that's just accommodation. That's just learning to not feel the things that Jesus said we should feel. The hunger that Jesus is talking about in Matthew 5:6, that's not a sign that you haven't arrived yet spiritually. It might be a sign that you have. All right, now I want to bring in another piece of the Sermon on the Mount that I think will help us diagnose what we're actually dealing with. Matthew 6:24, later in the same sermon that we've been talking about, Jesus says this: you cannot serve God and mammon. Now, mammon, that's a word that we don't even use anymore. And sometimes it gets translated as money. But mammon in the ancient world wasn't just cash. Mammon was the whole system. It's the whole network of power and accumulation and acquisition that runs wealth and perpetuates itself at the expense of everything else. And Jesus doesn't say you shouldn't serve mammon. He doesn't say it's unwise or it's risky or spiritually dangerous to serve mammon. He says you cannot. Present tense. Structural impossibility. You cannot orient your whole life around the accumulation of wealth and power and also be oriented towards God and neighbor. Those two things point in opposite directions. You have to pick a master. Now, here's what I want you to notice, though. Jesus isn't saying this to billionaires. He's saying this to fishermen, day laborers, people at the bottom of the Roman economic ladder. He's not giving them a lecture about how the rich need to do better, though there's plenty of that elsewhere in the Gospels. He's given them a framework for understanding the world that they're living in. He's saying the system you're trapped under, it has a master. And that master, it's not God. And when we see billion-dollar corporations pay zero in taxes while regular people carry all the weight, I want to be very careful not to just make this a political talking point, because both sides of the aisle have been captured by mammon in different ways. This isn't a left or right issue. This is a mammon issue. The system is functioning exactly the way a system built to serve mammon functions. It protects the accumulation of wealth at the top. It offloads the cost onto those with the least leverage. It caused the arrangement normal, inevitable, just the way things work. And the Sermon on the Mount, you know what it says? No, that's not just the way things work. That's mammon. That's a master. And you don't have to bow to that master. Now, this is important. Jesus doesn't respond to mammon with revolt. I know I said earlier this week that we should be revolting. And I thought that until I sat with this. He doesn't call the fishermen to burn Rome down. He calls them to something, I would say, much harder. And in some ways, a whole lot more subversive. He says, go the extra mile. He says, turn the other cheek. Give your coat and your cloak. Now, many of you, I already hear it in your little brains, that sounds like passivity. They've been used to preach passivity for centuries. But scholars, they argue that the actions in their original cultural context were actually acts of non-violent exposure. They made the injustice visible. They refused to play by the system's rules. They were forms of resistance that didn't mirror the violence of the oppressor. The Sermon on the Mount is not telling you to be a doormat. It's telling you to be ungovernable in a specific way, very specific way. Not through violence, through a refusal to be shaped by the same master. I want to zoom out for just a second because I think that it will help us to see that Jesus didn't even invent this framework. He was standing inside of a really long tradition. Like the Hebrew prophets, they were relentless on this stuff. Amos, Isaiah, Micah, these guys were not subtle. Amos 5 says this. God says through the prophet, I hate your religious festivals. I despise your worship assemblies. Your offerings mean nothing to me. Why? Because justice is not rolling down in your communities. Because you're selling the poor for a pair of sandals. Wow. Isaiah 58 goes to say this. The people are fasting and wondering why God isn't answering. And God says, you want to know what real fasting looks like? Loose the chains of injustice. Free the oppressed. Share your food with the hungry. Y'all, these aren't fringe voices. These are the central texts of the tradition that Jesus grew up in. This is the air that he breathed. So when Jesus stands on a mountain and says, blessed are those who hunger for justice, he's not introducing a new concept. He's standing in a prophetic line that goes back for centuries and saying, yes, this, still, now. The hunger that you feel when you see the powerful protected and the vulnerable exposed, that hunger has a name in this tradition. It's called prophecy. It's called bearing witness. It's called being shaped by the Spirit of God rather than shaped by the spirit of mammon. And I want to say something that might land hard for some of us. There's a version of Christianity that has gotten very comfortable with the current order, that sees the protection of wealth and power as basically compatible with the kingdom of God. And that reads the Bible through the lens of the status quo rather than reading the status quo through the lens of the Bible. The Sermon on the Mount, it won't let you do that. It just won't. Not because Jesus was a political revolutionary in the way that we'd recognize him today, no. But because of his vision of the kingdom was so thoroughly incompatible with Mammon's vision of the world that you cannot hold both at the same time. You cannot serve two masters. All right, so I'll come down from the little prophetic mountain for just a minute, and I'll talk to you just to talk to you. If you're listening to this and you feel the ache, the frustration, the anger, that sense that the game is rigged and you're playing by rules that were written to make you lose, I want you to hear something. That feeling is not evidence that you failed spiritually. It might be evidence that you're actually paying attention. Jesus stood in front of a crowd of people who were being squeezed by the empire, taxed into poverty by the religious institution, written off by the powerful and the comfortable. And he looked at them and said, you are blessed. You're in the right position. What you hunger for is exactly what God is moving toward. That's not a small thing. That's a massive reframe. Now, and I have to say this because I truly think it matters. Hunger for justice is not the same thing as bitterness. It's not the same thing as hatred. It's not the same thing as writing anyone off who has more than you. The Sermon on the Mount holds together hunger for justice and love for enemy. Matthew 5:44, love your enemies, pray for those who persecute you. That's one of the hardest things in all of human history to actually do. And Jesus said, do it. So we don't get to carry righteous anger into dehumanization. We don't get to use prophetic clarity as the license for contempt. But we do get to feel it. We do get to name it. We do get to say that this is wrong. The system is broken. The master it serves, it's not God. And then we get to ask the harder question. What does it look like for me in my actual life to refuse to be shaped by that master? That's not a question that I can answer for you because it looks different really for everybody. But I think it starts with exactly what Jesus said. Hunger and thirst for it. Don't let the numbness win. Don't let the accommodation win. Don't let the version of spiritual maturity that's really just learned helplessness win. Stay hungry. Because Jesus said the hungry, they're the ones who are blessed. And the blessed ones are standing in exactly the right place for what's coming. That's this episode. I'm Cody. This is Friendly Fire. The blessed are the curious.